Commander Zethkai's 6 eyes scanned the tactical display with practiced ease, his chitinous fingers dancing across the holographic controls of the Cathara flagship, Endless Wisdom. The war room hummed with the quiet efficiency of a dozen different species working in harmony, each contributing their unique abilities to the massive coordination effort required to face the Voidborn threat. The Voidborn had appeared 3 cycles ago at the galaxy's rim. They were not invaders in any traditional sense. They were devourers. Entire star systems vanished into their maw, leaving behind nothing but empty space and the haunting silence of the void. No communication had ever been established. No demands made. No mercy shown. "Commander," the voice belonged to Sub-Admiral Thornax, a Rillan whose crystal blue skin shifted colors with his emotional state. Currently, it displayed the deep purple of concern. "The human delegation has arrived." Zethkai suppressed the equivalent of a sigh. The humans. In the 300 cycles since first contact, humanity had proven to be an oddity among galactic civilizations. They were young, aggressive, and possessed an unsettling tendency toward what the Psychological Assessment Bureau had classified as voluntary self-endangerment for abstract concepts. Their technology lagged behind most council species by several generations. Their ships were bulky, inefficient, and relied heavily on kinetic weapons that most civilizations had abandoned millennia ago. Their military doctrine seemed to revolve around the bizarre concept of acceptable losses, a phrase that made every civilized species uncomfortable. "Send them in," Zethkai commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets before humans had even discovered fusion power. The delegation that entered consisted of 3 individuals, which immediately struck Zethkai as odd. Most species sent elaborate diplomatic parties with dozens of advisors, translators, and ceremonial guards. These humans walked with a casual confidence that bordered on arrogance. The leader was a female human named Admiral Sarah Chen, whose graying hair and weathered features spoke of extensive combat experience. Beside her stood General Marcus Reed, a massive human whose scarred hands and calculating eyes marked him as someone intimately familiar with violence. The third was someone introduced simply as Director Walsh, from something called the Office of Strategic Operations, a thin, unremarkable human whose presence somehow made Zethkai's instincts whisper warnings. "Commander Zethkai," Admiral Chen spoke in accented galactic standard, her voice carrying none of the formal diplomatic courtesy expected in such situations. "We've reviewed your tactical assessments of the Voidborn threat. We're here to help." The audacity was breathtaking. Here was a species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel offering to help civilizations that had been spacefaring for millennia. Around the room, Zethkai could sense the barely contained amusement of his senior staff. "Admiral Chen," Zethkai replied with diplomatic precision, "we appreciate Earth's willingness to contribute to the war effort. However, I must point out that humanity's fleet consists of fewer than 200 vessels, most of which would be classified as light cruisers by Council standards. The Voidborn have consumed over 40 star systems. Perhaps your people might better serve by providing logistical support or manufacturing assistance." General Reed stepped forward, and Zethkai noticed that several of his security officers unconsciously shifted their stance. There was something predatory about the humans' movement, something that triggered ancient prey instincts across multiple species. "Commander," Reed's voice was gravelly, worn smooth by years of shouting orders over the sound of warfare, "with respect, you're thinking about this all wrong. You've been fighting the Voidborn like they're just another enemy fleet. They're not. They're a force of nature, and you can't beat a hurricane by throwing bigger ships at it. Then what do you propose?" This came from Admiral Vexstar, a hegemony representative whose species had lost 2 entire colonies to the Voidborn advance. Her tone carried the weight of personal loss and growing desperation. Director Walsh spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but somehow commanding attention. "We propose you let us show you what humans do when we're backed into a corner." The silence that followed was pregnant with unspoken questions. Finally, Zethkai activated the main tactical display, showing the galaxy with red markers indicating Voidborn positions and the defensive lines established by Council forces. "The Voidborn fleet is here," he indicated a massive red zone near the outer rim. "Intelligence estimates suggest they number in the thousands, possibly tens of thousands. Their ships are larger than our dreadnoughts and seem capable of regenerating damage at an alarming rate. They consume stellar matter to fuel their advance, making them effectively impossible to starve out." Admiral Chen studied the display with the focus of a predator examining prey. "What about their movement patterns?" "Predictable to a degree," Sub-Admiral Thornax interjected. They move from system to system along the path of least resistance, always seeking the richest sources of stellar matter. They've ignored several uninhabited systems that lacked significant stellar resources. No, Chen shook her head. That's not what I meant. How do they move? Do they jump as a unified fleet or in smaller groups? The question caught Zethkai off guard. In 3 cycles of warfare, no one had thought to examine the tactical minutiae of void-born fleet movements. They had been too focused on the overwhelming threat to consider the details. Our analysts haven't, he began, then stopped. The admission felt like failure. General Reed was already moving to the tactical station, his hands dancing over controls with surprising familiarity. Mind if I take a look at your raw sensor data? Before anyone could object, Reed had called up 3 cycles worth of battle reports and sensor logs. His eyes moved with mechanical precision, absorbing information at a rate that seemed impossible for a species supposedly inferior in cognitive processing. There, he pointed to a series of data points that had been dismissed as sensor noise. They don't move as one fleet. They move in pods, hunting packs. Each pod operates independently, but they maintain communication through some kind of quantum entanglement network. Director Walsh nodded approvingly. Which means, Admiral Chen concluded, they can be separated, isolated. And if you can isolate them, you can kill them. General Reed finished with the satisfaction of a predator that had found its prey's weakness. Zethkai felt the first stirring of something he hadn't experienced in cycles, hope. But it was tempered by the logical assessment of the tactical situation. Even if your analysis is correct, human weapons technology is insufficient to engage void-born vessels in direct combat. Our best ships barely survive single encounters. The 3 humans exchanged a look that Zethkai would later learn to recognize as the moment before humans did something that defied all reasonable expectations. Commander, Admiral Chen said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, you're still thinking like this is a traditional war. It's not. This is an extermination event, and humans have a very particular set of skills when it comes to surviving extinction. Over the next several hours, the human delegation outlined a strategy so audacious, so seemingly suicidal that every military expert in the room declared it impossible. They proposed using human fleets as bait, drawing void-born hunting packs away from the main fleet and into carefully prepared kill zones. The plan relied on human ships being fast enough to outrun void-born vessels. They weren't. It required human weapons to be powerful enough to damage void-born hulls. They weren't. Most critically, it demanded that human crews be willing to engage in combat with casualty rates that approached 100%. This is madness, Admiral Vexstar declared. You're asking your people to commit suicide. No, Director Walsh replied quietly. We're asking them to do what humans have always done when faced with extinction. We're asking them to buy time for everyone else to survive. The room fell silent. Across a dozen different species, the concept of voluntary sacrifice for strangers was not unknown, but it was rare. What the humans proposed went beyond heroism into something that bordered on species-wide insanity. And you believe your people will agree to this? Zethkai asked, genuinely curious about the psychological mechanisms that could drive an entire species to such a decision. General Reed's laugh was short and bitter. Commander, you still don't understand what humans are. We're not just another species that happened to develop spaceflight. We're the end result of 4 billion years of evolutionary pressure on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. He activated a holographic display showing Earth's history. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, plague, famine, war. Every other species in this galaxy developed on garden worlds, protected by stable stars and peaceful neighbors. We came from a planet that mass extincted its own biosphere 6 times before we even evolved. We survived by becoming the most efficient killers in our planet's history, and then we survived each other. The display shifted to show human conflicts throughout history. Wars that consumed millions of lives, battles fought with primitive weapons against impossible odds, last stands that became legendary precisely because defeat was certain. What you call suicide, Admiral Chen added, we call Tuesday. As the meeting concluded and the human delegation prepared to return to their fleet, Zethkai found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about the species from Sol. Perhaps their crude technology and aggressive nature weren't signs of a primitive civilization. Perhaps they were the refined products of an evolutionary crucible no other species had endured. The first test of the human strategy would come within days. Void-born scouts had been detected at the edge of the Kepler system, home to over 3 billion Federation citizens. The evacuation was already underway, but it would take weeks to complete. Admiral Chen had volunteered her flagship, the UES Indomitable, to serve as bait. The ship was ancient by human standards, her hull scarred by dozens of conflicts, her systems jury-rigged and maintained by sheer stubbornness. By galactic standards, she was little more than an armed cargo hauler. But as Zefkai watched the human fleet deploy, he began to notice details that his initial assessment had missed. The ships moved with a precision that spoke of crews who had trained together for years. Their formation was loose enough to allow for individual maneuvering but tight enough to provide mutual support. Most telling, their sensor arrays were active across spectrums that most species ignored, hunting frequencies. The humans weren't deploying like a military force preparing for battle. They were deploying like a pack of predators preparing to hunt. And for the first time since the Voidborn had appeared, Commander Zefkai began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the galaxy had been asking the wrong question all along. The question wasn't whether humanity could help fight the Voidborn. The question was whether the Voidborn were ready to face humanity. As the Indomitable disappeared into hyperspace, followed by her escorts, Zefkai realized he was about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. Not the last stand of a doomed species, but the hunting expedition of apex predators who had finally found prey worthy of their attention. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see what happened when an unstoppable force met the most stubbornly immovable species in the known universe. The UES Indomitable emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system like a wounded animal limping into a predator's den. Her hull bore the scars of a dozen campaigns, patched with armor plating from 3 different human colonies and held together by what Admiral Chen privately called spite and steel cables. Captain Torres maintained the facade of routine patrol operations while his crew worked with the quiet efficiency of people who knew they might die in the next few hours. The atmosphere was tense but not panicked. Humans had long ago learned to function under the shadow of imminent death. "Sensor sweep complete, Admiral," reported Lieutenant Murphy, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. "No signs of Voidborn presence, but the outer system shows signs of gravitational distortion. They're coming." Admiral Chen studied the tactical display with the focus of someone who had spent her career turning impossible situations into unlikely victories. The Indomitable was alone except for 2 destroyers, the UES Defiant and UES Relentless, both of which carried skeleton crews of volunteers who had been told exactly what this mission entailed. "Time until the evacuation fleet clears the inner system?" Chen asked. 14 hours, 37 minutes, came the reply from the navigation station. "Then that's how long we hold them." Chen's statement was delivered with the casual certainty of someone ordering coffee, not committing to a holding action against a force that had never been stopped. 3 light-years away aboard the Cathara flagship Endless Wisdom, Commander Zefkai monitored the human operation with growing unease. Every tactical analysis suggested that the humans were committing elaborate suicide, yet their calm professionalism suggested they believed they could succeed. "Sir," Sub-Admiral Thornax reported, his crystalline skin shifting to the deep blue of confusion, "human fleet communications are unusual." "Explain." "They're not using standard military protocols. Their communications are informal, almost conversational. Listen to this." The bridge speakers crackled with intercepted human transmissions. "Defiant to Indomitable. We're picking up some interesting readings on the edge of sensor range. Looks like our guests are arriving fashionably late. Copy that, Defiant. Relentless, you seeing this?" "Affirmative, Admiral. Looks like we've got about 6 of them moving in standard hunting formation." "Just like General Reed predicted. Outstanding. Remember, people, we're not here to win. We're here to be incredibly annoying." Zefkai's antennae twitched in bewilderment. The humans were discussing their imminent encounter with an unstoppable enemy fleet, as if they were planning a training exercise. Either they were suffering from some form of species-wide delusion, or they possessed a fundamental understanding of warfare that eluded every other civilization in the galaxy. On the Indomitable, the first Voidborn vessels appeared on sensors as gravitational anomalies that twisted space around them. They emerged from the cosmic dark like living nightmares, their hulls defying conventional physics and their mere presence causing reality to bend in impossible ways. 6 confirmed contacts, Murphy reported. Each one approximately 3 times our mass. They're moving to intercept in standard hunting formation. Admiral Chen smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose hypothesis was being confirmed. Just like every other predator in the universe. They hunt in packs, which means they think like a pack. Captain Torres, signal the fleet. It's time to remind these things what happens when apex predators meet something that refuses to be prey. The human battle plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Rather than attempting to engage the Voidborn vessels directly, They would use their ships as bait to separate the hunting pack and draw them away from the evacuation routes. Each human vessel would engage a single Voidborn ship, leading them into a running battle through the outer system while the evacuation fleet completed its withdrawal. Defiant, you take the lead hunter. Relentless, you get the one hanging back. They always leave a reserve. Indomitable will handle the center mass. Once we've got them separated, we execute the Murphy Doctrine. Across the human fleet, crews prepared to implement a strategy that existed only in human military theory, the deliberate escalation of a losing battle to achieve strategic objectives, named after an ancient human military law that stated anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and at the worst possible moment, the Murphy Doctrine was based on the uniquely human ability to function effectively when everything was falling apart. The first engagement came as the Voidborn ships moved to intercept the human fleet. The Defiant, smallest and fastest of the human vessels, suddenly broke formation and accelerated directly toward the lead Voidborn vessel at maximum burn. What happened next defied everything the galactic military establishment thought it knew about combat doctrine. Rather than maintaining distance and attempting to engage with long-range weapons, Captain Morrison of the Defiant took his ship into a close-range engagement that brought him within a few hundred meters of the Voidborn hull. At that distance, the alien vessel's exotic energy weapons became ineffective. They were designed for long-range consumption of stellar matter, not close-quarters combat. "This is Defiant." Morrison's voice came across the comm with the casual tone of someone discussing weekend plans, initiating knife fight protocols. "Remember, kids, it's not stupid if it works." The Defiant opened fire with every weapon she possessed, dumping kinetic rounds and fusion warheads into the Voidborn hull at point-blank range. The alien vessel, designed to consume entire planets, found itself in the unprecedented situation of being attacked by something small enough and aggressive enough to exploit the gaps in its defenses. The Voidborn response was immediate and devastating. Energy weapons that could vaporize asteroids focused their fury on the tiny human ship, but the Defiant was no longer where she had been when they fired. Captain Morrison had put his ship into a rapid spiral around the Voidborn vessel, using its own massive gravity well to slingshot around its hull in an impossible three-dimensional dance of destruction. "Defiant to fleet," Morrison reported with obvious satisfaction. "I've got this ugly son of a bitch's attention. He's following me toward the outer system." Beginning Phase 2. Phase 2 of the Murphy Doctrine was what human military theorists called aggressive disengagement, the art of retreating in such a way that the enemy was forced to pursue you into an increasingly disadvantageous position. The Defiant led her Voidborn pursuer away from the main battle, engaging in a running firefight that drew the alien vessel away from its pack and toward the carefully prepared killing ground near Kepler's outer planets. The Relentless executed a similar maneuver, using her superior maneuverability to engage and separate another Voidborn vessel. Captain Sarah Kim had volunteered for the mission despite being 3 weeks away from retirement, a decision that her crew had accepted with the grim humor characteristic of humans facing impossible odds. Relentless to indomitable. Kim's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too many battles and knew this would be her last. "We've got their attention," initiating the Kobayashi Maru protocol. The reference to an ancient human training simulation that was designed to be unwinnable brought smiles to the faces of human crew members across the fleet. The Kobayashi Maru was a test of character. How would you react when faced with certain defeat? The answer, apparently, was that humans would find a way to cheat. Admiral Chen watched as 2 of her ships led their Voidborn pursuers away from the main threat axis, but she knew the real test was about to begin. The remaining 4 Voidborn vessels were converging on the Indomitable, and she was about to demonstrate why humans had earned a reputation for being dangerously unpredictable. "All hands! This is the Admiral!" Chen's voice echoed throughout the ship. "We are about to engage in combat with an enemy that has consumed 40 star systems and is considered unstoppable by every military force in the galaxy. Our job is to prove them wrong. Our mission is to buy time for 3 billion civilians to escape to safety. Our method is to be so incredibly stubborn that we make the impossible look routine." "Any questions?" The response came from every section of the ship simultaneously. "No, ma'am." What followed was a masterclass in human tactical innovation. The Indomitable didn't retreat or attempt to maintain distance. Instead, Admiral Chen ordered her ship directly into the center of the Voidborn formation, using her vessel's smaller size and superior maneuverability to create chaos among the alien vessels. The Voidborn had evolved to fight massive fleet engagements where superior firepower and exotic technology could overwhelm any opposition. They had never encountered an enemy willing to engage in the kind of close-quarters, high-speed combat that humans had perfected during centuries of warfare in Earth's gravity wells. Implementing the Thermopylae Gambit, Admiral Chen announced, referencing another ancient human battle where a small force had held off a vastly superior enemy through superior tactics and sheer bloody-minded determination. The Indomitable wove between the Voidborn vessels like a terrier attacking a pack of wolves, her weapon system cycling through every kind of ammunition in her arsenal. Kinetic rounds, fusion warheads, plasma charges, and weapons that existed only in human military laboratories created a devastating crossfire that the Voidborn had no experience countering. But the real genius of the human strategy wasn't in the weapons. It was in the psychology. The Voidborn hunted as a pack, coordinating their movements through some form of quantum communication network. The humans had deliberately created a situation where that coordination became a liability, as the alien vessels found themselves unable to fire without risking damage to their own ships. "This is indomitable," Admiral Chen reported with the satisfaction of someone whose plan was working exactly as intended. "We have successfully turned a Voidborn hunting pack into a Voidborn traffic jam." Beginning Phase 3. Phase 3 was the culmination of human tactical doctrine, the moment when retreat became strategic redeployment, and defeat became costly victory. The Indomitable had done what she came to do. She had broken the Voidborn formation and drawn them away from the evacuation routes. Now came the hard part. All ships, Admiral Chen transmitted across all frequencies, including those monitored by the Galactic Fleet, initiate Broken Arrow protocols. "We are weapons-free for extraordinary measures." Across the galaxy, military commanders who had been monitoring the human operation suddenly realized that they had been watching the warm-up act. The real demonstration of human warfare was about to begin. Because Broken Arrow protocols weren't about winning battles through superior firepower or advanced technology. Broken Arrow was about ensuring that even in defeat the enemy paid such a terrible price that they would think twice before engaging humans again. It was the doctrine that had allowed a young, aggressive species to earn the respect of civilizations that had been spacefaring for millennia. It was the reason that, despite their technological disadvantages, humans had never lost a war they had committed to winning. And it was about to teach the Voidborn why sometimes the prey fights back. The phrase Broken Arrow had originated in ancient human military terminology used to describe situations where nuclear weapons were involved in accidents or incidents. In the context of human space warfare, it had evolved into something far more terrifying: authorization for actions that went beyond conventional warfare into the realm of species-defining desperation. Admiral Chen's authorization of Broken Arrow protocols sent a chill through every monitoring station in the Galactic Fleet. Those who had studied human military history knew what it meant. The gloves were coming off. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain Torres received the authorization with the grim satisfaction of someone who had been waiting his entire career for permission to show the galaxy what human engineering was really capable of when survival was at stake. "Engineering, this is the bridge." Torres spoke into his comm with the calm tone of someone ordering routine maintenance. "Initiate Prometheus protocols. Authorization, Broken Arrow Alpha 7. 3 decks down, Chief Engineer Martinez received the order with a mixture of excitement and terror. The Prometheus protocols were theoretical applications of human technology that existed only in classified technical manuals. They were weapons that could only be used once, systems that would consume the ship that deployed them, and tactics that redefined the boundary between courage and insanity. "Bridge, this is engineering," Martinez replied, his hands already moving across control panels that hadn't been activated since the ship's commissioning. "Prometheus protocols acknowledged. Be advised, once we start this process, there's no going back." "Understood, Chief. How long do you need?" "Give me 20 minutes and I'll turn this old girl into the most dangerous thing in the galaxy." 20 light-years away, the evacuation fleet continued its withdrawal from the Kepler system, carrying 3 billion civilians towards safety. They moved in the organized chaos that characterized all large-scale human evacuations, efficient, determined, and accompanied by the kind of dark humor that humans use to cope with existential dread. Captain Elizabeth Harrison of the evacuation ship New Horizon monitored the tactical feeds from the battle group with growing concern. The human ships were holding their positions, but the cost was becoming apparent. The Defiant had lost main power and was running on backup systems. The Relentless was venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches, and the Indomitable was engaged in close combat with 4 Voidborn vessels simultaneously. "Captain," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Chen. It's marked Priority Alpha." The message that came through was brief and characteristic of human military communication. "Evacuation fleet, this is Admiral Chen. Continue withdrawal as planned. Do not deviate from course regardless of what you observe in the next 30 minutes. We are about to demonstrate why humans don't surrender. Chen out. On the bridge of the Kythera flagship Endless Wisdom, Commander Zefkai watched the human operation with growing amazement. The tactical situation was impossible. 3 human vessels engaging 6 void-born ships in a running battle that should have ended in their annihilation within minutes. Yet somehow the humans continued to fight. Sir, Sub-Admiral Thornax reported, his skin showing the rapid color changes that indicated extreme confusion. Human battle damage reports don't make sense. Explain. The Defiant has lost main power, suffered multiple hull breaches, and her fusion reactor is operating at 17% capacity. According to our tactical computers, she should be a derelict. But she's still maneuvering and returning fire. Zefkai studied the tactical display more closely. The human ships were indeed heavily damaged, far beyond the point where any reasonable crew would have abandoned ship. Yet they continued to fight with the mechanical precision of machines that had been programmed to ignore their own destruction. Pull up the detailed sensor readings, he ordered. What the sensors revealed defied conventional understanding of how spacecraft operated. The human vessels had effectively rebuilt themselves during combat, rerouting power through damaged systems, jury-rigging weapons that should have been offline, and maintaining structural integrity through methods that seemed to violate several laws of physics. How are they doing this? Zefkai asked, directing the question to his tactical analysis team. The answer came from Lieutenant Kexizara, a young hegemony officer who specialized in human military studies. Sir, I believe they're implementing what humans call emergency engineering protocols. Their ships are designed to be rebuilt during combat using whatever materials are available. That's impossible! You can't rebuild a starship's power distribution network while under fire. You can if you design the ship specifically for that purpose and train your crew to treat catastrophic damage as a normal operating condition. The realization hit Zefkai like a cold shock. The humans hadn't built warships in the traditional sense. They had built machines specifically designed to continue functioning while being destroyed, crewed by people who had been trained to treat their own imminent death as merely another tactical consideration. It was warfare as practiced by a species that had normalized the abnormal and made the impossible routine. Aboard the Indomitable, the Prometheus protocols were reaching completion. Chief Engineer Martinez had spent the last 20 minutes turning his ship into something that existed nowhere in conventional military theory. A vessel capable of inflicting damage proportional not to its weapons capacity, but to its crew's willingness to sacrifice everything. Bridge, this is engineering, Martinez reported with the satisfaction of an artist completing his masterpiece. Prometheus protocols are online. We are now officially the most dangerous ship in human space. Define dangerous, Chief. We've reconfigured the fusion reactor to operate as a controlled stellar collapse device. The main deflector array has been converted into a gravitational focus beam. And we've loaded every torpedo tube with singularity warheads that our boys in R&D swore were purely theoretical. Captain Torres absorbed this information with the calm of someone who had long ago accepted that human engineering existed primarily to give the universe new things to worry about. Time to implementation. We can initiate on your command, sir. But, Captain, once we start this, we've got maybe 10 minutes before the ship comes apart. The laws of physics are more like guidelines for human engineers, but they're still laws. Admiral Chen listened to the exchange with the quiet pride of someone whose faith in human ingenuity was being validated in the most extreme circumstances possible. The Prometheus protocols represented the culmination of human military engineering, weapons that could only be deployed by crews willing to sacrifice their own survival for strategic advantage. All hands, this is Admiral Chen, she announced throughout the ship. In approximately 10 minutes, we are going to demonstrate to the Voidborn why humanity earned its reputation as the galaxy's most stubborn species. What we're about to do has never been attempted in actual combat. The theoretical models suggest we have a 73% chance of success and a 100% chance of ship loss. She paused, letting the implications sink in before continuing. Any crew member who wishes to transfer to the escape pods has 5 minutes to do so. No one will think less of you for making that choice. The response came back from every section of the ship in a chorus of voices that carried the weight of species-wide determination. Respectfully decline, Admiral. We didn't come this far to take the easy way out. The first implementation of the Prometheus protocols began with the Indomitable doing something that violated several fundamental principles of starship design. Admiral Chen ordered her ship to ram the largest Voidborn vessel at maximum acceleration while simultaneously detonating every explosive device on board. But this wasn't a suicide run in the traditional sense. The Indomitable had been reconfigured to survive the collision long enough to deploy weapons that existed only in theoretical physics journals and the fevered imagination of human military engineers. The collision occurred at a relative velocity that should have vaporized both vessels instantly. Instead, the human ship's specially configured hull plating transferred the kinetic energy into the void-borne vessel, while the Indomitable's experimental gravitational manipulation systems created a localized space-time distortion that allowed her to remain intact for the critical seconds needed to complete her mission. Prometheus Device 1, armed and ready, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh from the weapons station, her voice steady despite the fact that she was about to deploy a weapon that would rewrite the textbooks on spatial engineering. Fire. What happened next would be studied by military theorists for generations. The Indomitable deployed a gravitational focus beam that created a localized black hole with a lifespan measured in nanoseconds, but an effect that lasted considerably longer. The beam punched through the void-borne vessel's exotic matter hull and continued through its entire length, creating a tunnel that violated the alien ship's structural integrity at the quantum level. The void-borne vessel, which had survived the consumption of entire star systems, found itself unable to maintain cohesion when faced with a weapon that attacked the fundamental forces holding its atoms together. Prometheus Device 2, initiated, Walsh reported as the Indomitable began its final gambit. The ship's fusion reactor had been reconfigured to operate as a controlled stellar collapse device, creating a miniature supernova that would consume everything within a light-second radius, while simultaneously broadcasting a gravitational wave pulse that would disrupt void-borne quantum communication networks throughout the system. "All hands, it has been an honor serving with you," Admiral Chen announced as the reactor began its final sequence. "Remember, we're not dying. We're just making room for the next generation to finish what we started." The explosion that followed was visible from 3 star systems away. The Indomitable and her crew ceased to exist in any conventional sense, but their sacrifice achieved something that no conventional weapon had managed: the complete destruction of a void-borne vessel and the disruption of the alien hunting pack's coordination. The remaining void-borne ships found themselves alone, separated from their packmates, and facing an enemy that had just demonstrated a willingness to use weapons that should have been physically impossible. On the Defiant, Captain Morrison watched the fireworks with professional appreciation. "Well, that's going to be hard to top. Relentless. You still with us?" "Still here, Defiant. And I think our new friends just learned why you don't mess with human ships."
It was true.
For the first time since their appearance at the galaxy's rim, void-borne vessels were retreating. The loss of their pack leader and the disruption of their communication network had forced them into individual action. And individually, they were discovering that humans were significantly more dangerous than their collective intelligence had calculated. "Defiant to evacuation fleet," Morrison transmitted, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had just survived the impossible. "Package delivered with extreme prejudice. The road home is clear." Captain Harrison of the New Horizon received the transmission with tears in her eyes. 3 billion civilians would live because 300 humans had decided that some things were worth dying for. But more than that, they had just demonstrated to the galaxy that the Void-born were not unstoppable. They could be fought. They could be beaten. It just required the kind of tactical thinking that came naturally to a species that had spent its evolutionary history turning extinction events into Tuesday morning inconveniences. As news of the human victory spread through the galactic communication networks, military commanders across 1,000 worlds began to reconsider their assessment of both the void-born threat and the human solution to it. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the void-born had appeared, the galaxy had reason to hope. Because humanity had just taught the universe a fundamental lesson about the difference between being unable to be stopped and being unwilling to stop. News of the human victory at Kepler spread through the galactic communication networks faster than hyperspace travel, carried by quantum entanglement relays and broadcast across every civilized world. For the first time in 3 cycles, the Void-born had been not just engaged, but decisively defeated. The reaction was immediate and profound. On the hegemony homeworld of Talerseth, the ruling council convened an emergency session that lasted 18 standard hours. Species that had been preparing for extinction suddenly found themselves reconsidering their evacuation plans. Military commanders who had written off entire sectors began studying human tactical manuals with the devotion of religious scholars. But perhaps the most significant response came from an unexpected source: the other human colonies. Admiral Sarah Chen had not expected to survive the Battle of Kepler, and her rescue by the fast courier ship UES Mercury 3 hours after the Indomitable's destruction came as something of a surprise. She had been found floating in an escape pod that should have been vaporized by the Prometheus device's detonation, protected by experimental shielding that her engineering team had apparently installed without bothering to mention it. "Captain Walsh," she said to the Mercury's commander as she was brought aboard, "I need immediate communication with Earth Command. Priority Alpha 7. Admiral, Walsh replied with the kind of careful respect reserved for people who had just redefined the art of warfare. Earth Command has been trying to reach you for the past 2 hours, along with representatives from 12 human colonies, the Martian Defense Fleet, and someone claiming to be the Emperor of New Texas. Chen smiled despite herself. The Emperor of New Texas was Admiral Jake Morrison, a former colonial marine who had declared independence for his Outer Rim colony, by virtue of being too far away for Earth to effectively govern and too well armed for anyone to argue with him. If Jake was calling, it meant the entire human diaspora had heard about Kepler. Put them through. What followed was a three-way conversation that would fundamentally alter the course of the war. Representatives from every human world, station, and colony ship joined the communication, each offering resources that had previously been unavailable to Earth Command. "Admiral Chen," came the gravelly voice of Admiral Morrison from New Texas, "we've been watching your little demonstration. Impressive work. We'd like to contribute to your next performance. Jake, I appreciate the offer, but this isn't a colonial matter. This is a species-level threat." "Exactly my point, Sarah. You've proved these void-born bastards can be killed. Now it's time to kill all of them." The conversation continued for hours as human colonies, independent worlds, and rogue stations that hadn't communicated with Earth in decades suddenly emerged from isolation to offer ships, resources, and volunteers for what was rapidly becoming a species-wide mobilization. The picture that emerged was staggering. Humanity, which the Galactic Council had assessed as possessing fewer than 200 military vessels, actually controlled over 3,000 ships scattered across 47 star systems. The discrepancy existed because humans had never felt the need to inform the galaxy about military assets that were none of their damn business. "Admiral," reported Captain Walsh as the communication conference concluded, "I am receiving fleet movement reports from across human space. It appears that every ship capable of mounting weapons is heading toward the front lines." Chen studied the tactical display with growing amazement. Merchant vessels were being retrofitted with military weapons. Mining ships were loading their holds with explosive charges. Even civilian transports were volunteering to serve as ammunition haulers and supply vessels. But most significantly, ships were emerging from deep space that had no official existence. Black projects, experimental vessels, and prototype weapon systems that had been developed in the shadows of human military research were suddenly declaring themselves ready for combat. "Captain," Chen said, with the satisfaction of someone whose faith in human ingenuity was being validated beyond her wildest expectations, "set course for the Rigel system. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten humanity's neighbors." The Rigel system had been under void-born assault for 6 standard days. Home to the Altarian Republic, a peaceful species of crystalline beings known for their mathematical prowess and philosophical nature, Rigel had been written off as lost by the Galactic Council. The evacuation fleet had departed 3 days earlier, carrying as many refugees as possible but leaving behind billions who couldn't be moved in time. The Altarians faced extinction with the quiet dignity that characterized their species, broadcasting mathematical theorems and philosophical observations into space as their final gift to galactic civilization. They did not expect rescue. The human fleet that emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Rigel system was unlike anything that had ever been assembled in galactic history. Over 800 ships of every conceivable design and purpose, unified only by their stubborn refusal to accept that extinction was inevitable. Leading the fleet was the U.S. Retribution, a vessel that officially didn't exist. Built in the shadow of Jupiter's moons as a prototype dreadnought, she represented the culmination of human military engineering. A ship designed specifically to fight enemies that couldn't be reasoned with, negotiated with, or deterred. Admiral Chen had transferred her flag to the Retribution for reasons that went beyond tactical necessity. The ship represented everything that humanity had learned from 3 centuries of warfare, refined into a weapon platform that could implement strategies no other species would consider. "Admiral," reported Captain James Mitchell, the Retribution's commanding officer, "we're receiving communication from the Altarian government. They're confused." The communication that came through carried the harmonic frequencies that characterized Altarian speech, translated into standard galactic through their crystalline communication networks. "Human fleet, this is Prime Resonance Veltar of the Altarian Republic. While we appreciate your gesture, we must inform you that the void-born presence in this system numbers over 200 vessels. Your sacrifice, while noble, will not change the outcome." Admiral Chen's response was characteristically direct. "Prime Resonance, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the human fleet. We're not here to sacrifice ourselves. We're here to exterminate every void-born in your system and then move on to the next one. Please keep your people in their shelters while we demonstrate proper pest control techniques. What followed was the first implementation of human doctrine against a full Voidborn fleet. The strategy had evolved from the lessons learned at Kepler, refined by the tactical insights of 47 different human military traditions, and enhanced by weapon systems that pushed the boundaries of theoretical physics. The human fleet didn't engage the Voidborn in conventional battle. Instead, they implemented what Admiral Morrison had dubbed the Hornet's Nest Protocol, a swarm attack pattern that turned every human ship into an individual threat while maintaining overall tactical coordination. 800 ships spread out across the Rigel system in a three-dimensional formation that defied conventional military logic. Rather than concentrating their forces for maximum firepower, the humans dispersed to create multiple simultaneous threat vectors that overwhelmed the Voidborn's collective intelligence network. Phase 1, Initiate, Admiral Chen commanded, and the human fleet began its demonstration of evolved warfare. The first wave consisted of converted merchant vessels and mining ships, vessels that appeared to be non-combatant targets but which had been retrofitted with weapons that exploited human ingenuity and complete disregard for conventional safety protocols. The merchant ship Lucky Strike approached a Voidborn vessel while broadcasting standard commercial identification codes. When the alien ship moved to consume what it perceived as an easy target, Captain Rodriguez initiated what his crew had christened the Surprise Party Protocol. The Lucky Strike's cargo holds opened to reveal not trade goods, but 300 autonomous hunter-killer drones armed with micro-singularity warheads. The drones swarmed the Voidborn vessel like angry insects, each one programmed with human tactical software that prioritized maximum damage over survival. Similar scenarios played out across the Rigel system as human ships revealed modifications that redefined the concept of non-combatant vessels. Cargo haulers became missile platforms, survey ships deployed experimental sensor jammers, and passenger liners launched boarding parties armed with weapons that existed only in classified human research facilities. The Voidborn response was swift and devastating, but it encountered a problem that their collective intelligence had never faced: an enemy that fought as individuals while thinking as a species. Every human ship operated independently, making tactical decisions based on local conditions and personal initiative. When Voidborn vessels focused their attention on one target, 3 others would appear from unexpected vectors. When they adapted to counter one human strategy, another variant would emerge from the chaos of battle. "This is retribution," Admiral Chen transmitted to the fleet. "Phase 2 is authorized. Show them what human engineering can do when we're properly motivated." Phase 2 involved the deployment of weapons that existed only because human scientists had spent decades asking what if, followed by why not, rather than should we. The experimental vessel U.S. Prometheus emerged from stealth to engage the largest Voidborn ship with weapons that attacked the fundamental forces holding matter together. The Nemesis, a converted asteroid mining platform, deployed gravitational manipulation devices that turned space debris into relativistic projectiles. The Thunderchild, a prototype battleship, opened fire with weapons that created localized temporal distortions. But the most effective human weapon wasn't technological. It was psychological. The Voidborn had evolved as a collective intelligence that processed information through quantum entanglement networks. They thought as a unified organism, making decisions based on the combined input of all their vessels. The humans had figured out how to turn that strength into a weakness. "Initiate the Babel Protocol," Admiral Chen commanded, and across the human fleet, specialized communication systems began broadcasting contradictory information directly into the Voidborn quantum network. The Babel Protocol was based on ancient human research into information warfare, refined by centuries of experience in psychological operations and enhanced by weapons-grade artificial intelligence systems. It flooded the Voidborn collective intelligence with so much contradictory data that their decision-making process began to break down. Voidborn vessels found themselves receiving conflicting orders from their own network. Ships that had operated in perfect coordination for millennia suddenly began making tactical errors as their collective intelligence struggled to process information that had been deliberately crafted to create cognitive paradoxes. "Target the communication nodes," Chen ordered as the Voidborn formation began to collapse into chaos. "Cut the strings and let's see how well they fight as individuals." The battle that followed demonstrated the fundamental difference between a species that had evolved collective intelligence and one that had learned to coordinate individual initiative. Without their quantum communication network, the Voidborn vessels found themselves facing 800 human ships that fought like a pack of wolves, each one capable of independent action but working toward a common goal. The outcome was inevitable. Within 6 hours, the Voidborn presence in the Rigel system had been completely eliminated. 200 alien vessels that had consumed 40 star systems were destroyed by a human fleet that suffered fewer than 30 casualties. Prime Resonance Veltar's communication to the human fleet carried harmonics that the translation systems interpreted as profound amazement. Admiral Chen, the Altarian Republic owes humanity a debt that resonates through the mathematical foundations of the universe. How did you achieve what every military force in the galaxy considered impossible? Admiral Chen's response would be quoted in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. Prime Resonance. We didn't do anything impossible, we just approached the problem like humans. See, every other species in the galaxy developed in environments that taught them to avoid extinction. We developed on a planet that specialized in extinction events. The difference is that we learned extinction is just another problem that needs solving. As news of the victory at Rigel spread through galactic communication networks, the psychological impact rippled across every civilized world. The Voidborn were no longer an unstoppable force of nature. They were just another enemy that needed killing, and humanity had just demonstrated they were very, very good at killing enemies. But perhaps more importantly, humanity had demonstrated something that would reshape galactic civilization. Sometimes the best defense against an existential threat wasn't superior technology or overwhelming force. Sometimes it was the simple, stubborn refusal to accept that defeat was inevitable. 6 months after the Battle of Rigel, the galaxy had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The war against the Voidborn continued, but it was no longer a desperate retreat toward inevitable extinction. It had become a systematic extermination campaign led by a species that had turned warfare into an art form. Commander Zethkai stood in the observation deck of the newly commissioned joint command vessel Unity's Blade, watching as the combined fleets of 47 species prepared for what human strategists had designated as Operation Final Answer. The fleet before him represented the largest military cooperation in galactic history, unified under human tactical doctrine and armed with weapons that blended the best technology of every civilized species with the uniquely human philosophy of maximum effect through minimum sanity. The transformation had been remarkable. Species that had spent millennia developing defensive strategies were learning to think offensively. Military commanders who had based their careers on protecting their civilizations were studying human tactical manuals that began with phrases like acceptable casualty rates and strategic sacrifice protocols. Commander, the voice belonged to Admiral Sarah Chen, who had been promoted to Supreme Allied Commander after her victories at Kepler and Rigel. The final briefing will begin in 10 minutes. Are you ready to see how this war ends? Zethkai's 6 eyes focused on the human admiral with a mixture of respect and lingering amazement. 6 months ago, he had dismissed humanity as a minor species with crude technology and aggressive tendencies. Now he found himself serving under the command of someone who had redefined warfare for an entire galaxy. Admiral, he replied with the formal courtesy that had become standard when addressing human military personnel. I confess I am both eager and terrified to witness the culmination of human strategic thinking. Chen's laugh carried the weight of someone who had spent the last 6 months teaching the galaxy that impossible was just another word for hasn't been tried by humans yet. The briefing room aboard Unity's Blade contained representatives from every species in the Galactic Alliance, along with holographic displays that showed the current tactical situation. The Voidborn had been driven back to their entry point at the galaxy's rim, their forces concentrated in a massive fleet that represented their final attempt to complete their consumption of galactic civilization. Intelligence estimates suggested the enemy force numbered in the tens of thousands of vessels, supported by converted stellar matter and exotic energy sources that defied conventional physics. It was a fleet capable of consuming entire star systems, protected by technology that had evolved over millions of years of galactic consumption. By any reasonable assessment, it should have been unstoppable. Ladies, gentlemen, and various other forms of sentient life. Admiral Chen began with a casual tone that had become her trademark. Welcome to the final exam in advanced pest control. Today we're going to demonstrate the ultimate expression of human military doctrine, the complete and total elimination of an existential threat. The tactical display activated to show the enemy fleet's position in the Void Nebula, a region of space where conventional sensors were useless and navigation required specialized equipment. The Voidborn had chosen their final stronghold well. It was a location where their advantages were maximized and conventional military tactics would be ineffective. The enemy has concentrated their entire remaining force in a defensive position that negates most of our technological advantages, Chen continued. They've learned from our previous engagements and adapted their tactics to counter our weapons and strategies. By all conventional military analysis, attacking them in their chosen stronghold would be suicide. She paused. allowing the implications to sink in before delivering the conclusion that every military professional in the room was expecting. Fortunately, humans stopped caring about conventional military analysis about the time we figured out how to throw rocks really hard at things we didn't like. Operation Final Answer will demonstrate why you never corner a species that specializes in turning impossible situations into impossible situations. The plan that Chen outlined defied every principle of military strategy that had been developed over millennia of galactic warfare. Rather than attempting to match the Voidborn's defensive advantages, the human strategy was designed around a single, fundamental principle: if you can't fight the enemy on your terms, change the terms. Operation Final Answer would not be a conventional battle. Instead, it would be the implementation of a strategy so audacious that it redefined the concept of warfare itself. Phase 1, Chen announced, is what we call knocking on the door. We're going to get their attention. The first phase involved something that human military theorists had designated as aggressive diplomacy. The combined galactic fleet would approach the Void Nebula and establish a communication link with the Voidborn collective intelligence, then deliver a message that had been carefully crafted by human psychological warfare specialists. The message was simple. You have consumed 40 star systems and killed billions of sentient beings. This ends now. You have one opportunity to withdraw from galactic space voluntarily. If you refuse, we will demonstrate why extinction events are a normal Tuesday for humanity. The Voidborn response came within minutes, transmitted through gravitational wave pulses that carried the weight of a collective intelligence that had consumed civilizations across multiple galaxies. The translation was equally simple: impossible. Your species lacks the capability to threaten our continued existence. We are inevitable. Perfect, Admiral Chen announced with the satisfaction of someone whose psychological profile of the enemy had been confirmed. They just gave us legal and moral justification for what we're about to do. Initiate Phase 2. Phase 2 involved the deployment of weapons that existed only because human engineers had spent decades asking questions that other species considered too dangerous to investigate. The combined fleet began launching projectiles that didn't appear on any conventional sensor array, devices that were designed not to destroy Voidborn vessels, but to fundamentally alter the nature of space-time in the Void Nebula. What we're deploying, Chen explained to the assembled commanders, are spatial modification devices based on human research into controlled stellar collapse. They don't destroy matter, they change the local laws of physics. Over the course of 6 hours, 3,000 devices were deployed throughout the Void Nebula, each one designed to create localized alterations in gravitational constants, temporal flow rates, and the fundamental forces that held matter together. Phase 3, Chen announced as the devices reached optimal deployment, is what humans call changing the rules of the game. The spatial modification devices activated simultaneously, creating a region of space where physics operated according to human theoretical models rather than universal constants. Inside the Void Nebula, gravitational forces fluctuated randomly, time moved at variable rates, and the exotic matter that comprised Voidborn vessels found itself subject to forces that their technology had never been designed to counter. A Voidborn fleet, which had been invulnerable in normal space, suddenly found themselves in an environment where their advantages meant nothing, and their collective intelligence had to deal with input from vessels experiencing different temporal flow rates. Now comes the fun part, Admiral Chen announced with the enthusiasm of someone unveiling a masterpiece. Phase 4, demonstration of applied human stubbornness. The combined galactic fleet entered the modified space of the Void Nebula, but they weren't attacking in any conventional sense. Instead, each vessel had been equipped with human-designed systems that allowed them to operate effectively in the chaotic physics environment that the spatial modification devices had created. What followed was less a battle than a systematic demonstration of why you never challenge a species that had spent its evolutionary history adapting to impossible conditions. The human-led fleet moved through the nebula like they owned it, their vessels configured to thrive in conditions that made the Voidborn ships barely functional. The engagement lasted 3 days, not because the enemy was particularly difficult to defeat, but because Admiral Chen wanted to ensure that every Voidborn vessel was accounted for. The systematic destruction of the enemy fleet was conducted with the methodical precision of a scientific experiment, with each enemy ship disabled and studied before being eliminated. This is Admiral Chen to all fleet commanders, her voice carried across the communication networks of every ship in the nebula. Operation Final Answer is complete. The Voidborn threat has been permanently eliminated. The silence that followed was broken by celebrations that echoed across the galaxy. Species that had prepared for extinction found themselves free to rebuild. Civilizations that had written their final histories discovered they had centuries of future to write instead. But perhaps the most significant moment came when Prime Resonance Veltar of the Altarian Republic transmitted a message that would be preserved in galactic archives for millennia to humanity, who taught us that extinction is merely a problem requiring a solution. The galaxy resonates with gratitude that cannot be measured by any mathematics we possess. Admiral Chen's response was characteristically human. Prime Resonance, we didn't save the galaxy. We just reminded it that nobody gets to destroy our neighbors without going through us first. And going through us is generally considered inadvisable. In the months that followed, as the galaxy began to rebuild and resettle the systems that had been consumed by the Voidborn, a fundamental shift occurred in how civilized species viewed humanity. The crude, aggressive species from Sol 3 were no longer seen as primitive newcomers to galactic civilization. They were recognized as the species you called when the impossible needed to become inevitable. Human military advisors were posted to every major fleet command. Human tactical doctrine became required study in military academies across 47 star systems. Human engineering principles were integrated into the defensive systems of every civilized world. But, more importantly, the galaxy had learned something fundamental about the nature of sentient life. There were species that developed on garden worlds under stable stars, growing wise and peaceful in the safety of predictable environments. And then there were species that developed on worlds that specialized in extinction events, learning to turn catastrophe into inconvenience and impossible odds into Tuesday morning routine. The galaxy had learned why, when the universe tried to end everything they cared about, every other species looked to humanity and asked, "So, what's the plan?" Because humanity always had a plan. And their plans had a disturbing tendency to work. Commander Zethkai, now serving as liaison between the Cathara Confederation and Human Space Command, would later write in his memoirs, "We spent centuries asking if we were alone in the universe. We never thought to ask if we wanted to meet the neighbors who weren't. But in the end, the galaxy was grateful they had. Because when the darkness came for them, they discovered they weren't alone. They had humanity. And that, as the Voidborn had learned too late, made all the difference."